Hey guys, this is Anthony. I'm here to give my answers for the Module 3 discussion board. And I'm going to start with question 1, which is according to our author, what is race and what are at least two different ways it is generally understood? Well, according to the author, he defines race as a group of human individuals that are culturally similar and have common ancestry amongst each other. And the first way that we can understand race is through Michael Omi and Howard Winant's concept of racial formation. They define this as the socio-historical process by which racial categories are created, inhabited, transformed, and destroyed. They say that the state is in the national government, is the primary site where race is constructed and contested. And as soon as I read this, I do agree with it because, especially for us as college students, there is like certain scholarships that are only available to people of a certain race or ethnicity. And same with like financial aid, they want to know your race and ethnicity. I think that depends on how much money you get. And then there's even government officials out there that try to appeal to certain cultures or races because they want their vote, so they'll buy into the cultural norms of that race in order to try to appeal to them and get their vote. And then the second way to understand race is through a racial project, which is an interpretation, representation, or explanation of racial dynamics and an effort to reorganize, redistribute resources along certain racial lines. Racial projects allow for cultural representation and racial categories, which is good if they do it correctly. Because as the book states, not all racial projects are inherently racist, but I think when they're done right, they could be a good thing for society. So question 2 is discuss racial theories and racial ideologies. What are they? What are the differences between the two? Racial theories are what we define as the lenses that help us make sense of patterns in our society, such as overrepresentation of African Americans in the criminal justice system. Racial ideologies are a set or sets, multiple of principles and ideas that divide people into different racial groups and serve the interest of one group. These are usually controlled by like the dominant group in the current society. And I think the main differences between them is that ideologies are usually, I feel like they're more malicious, and because they're meant to serve the needs of a certain culture or for somebody's personal gain, kind of like the slave codes, I think, where the purpose of the slave codes was to divide the blacks and the whites, and the ones who had personal gain from those were the plantation owners, because they just wanted to make sure blacks and whites would not come together to interrupt their profit that they're making off the plantation. And racial theories is just really how we make sense about what's already going on in the current world, like racial wise. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing that could be malicious about trying to figure out what's going on. But examples of theories are institutional racism, structural racism, individual racism, because they're all meant to analyze kind of what's going on in the world currently and kind of make sense of the racial disparities that's going on between different races. So question 3 is explain and discuss the differences between institutional, systematic, and structural racism. Well, first is institutional racism, and it's defined as the laws, policies, and institutions that reproduce racial inequalities. I think we've all heard of the biggest example of institutional racism that's going on today, and that's the instances of police brutality that's going on against like the Latinos and the African Americans. It's like all over the news. I haven't heard much about it recently, but I'm sure there's still some going on. I just don't pay attention to the news too much. Personally, I do have experience with it. Not me personally, but somebody in my family. my uncle was arrested for some drug and weapons charges, and after the whole process and all that, he had to go to jail for 5 years, and he is still currently in jail. But one of my uncle's friends committed the same crime, well, a very, very similar crime with weapons and drugs, and he got off the hook with, well, I don't say off the hook because he still got 2 years of jail time, but I feel like 5 years of jail time versus 2 years of jail time is a big disparity in the legal system, which is supposed to bring equal justice. My uncle was Mexican, and then my other uncle's friend was a white man. And as the book describes it, I think it has to do something with the race, because that's the only thing that's really different. They committed the same crime, and so I do agree with the concept of institutional racism. And systematic racism is a diverse assortment of racist practices such as the unjustly gained economic and political power of whites, continuing resource inequalities, and the white racist ideologies, attitudes, and institutions created to preserve white advantage and power. So many African Americans and Latinos are stuck either below or right at the middle class, just based on all the laws and policies that kind of keep them down, like the book describes. So they don't really always have the opportunity to rise up and climb the ranks as much, because they always have to struggle with moving out of a poor or a bad neighborhood, taking care of their families. So they always have some kind of struggles to handle before they take on something bigger like that. Not to say that white people do not have struggles, but I think there is a big difference in the struggles between Latinos, African Americans, and whites. And finally, structural racism. It points to interinstitutional interactions across time and space. So this is like when a child grows up in a racist household, or at least a household that's got like overt racial beliefs. Then they go out to school or to the workplace and just spread those beliefs to other people, and that's how it just gets bigger and bigger of a problem. I also have experience with this one, because in elementary school, I believe it was like second grade, we were out at recess, and there was like a big group of kids. One kid was telling a joke, and it was a pretty racist joke, and when he got done talking about it, like half of the kids didn't really understand what it meant. So the kids that did understand it started to kind of describe and define the stereotypes that made the joke's punchline, and then they understood it. And then the very next day, I saw some more kids telling that same joke to other kids, and so I think it does spread like that. So I do believe that this is also true, just from my personal beliefs. And the last question for this discussion is, how does our author argue that colorblind racism works? Colorblind racism is defined in the book as a racial ideology that explains contemporary racial inequality as the outcome of non-racial dynamics like natural phenomena, market dynamics, and non-white supposed cultural limitations. Well, first the author talks about abstract liberalism, which he defines as justification of racial inequality through the use of liberal ideas. And by that he means like if there's African Americans that are living in a poor neighborhood, that they are living in that neighborhood because it's their choice, which of course is not always the case. Some people just do not have the option to move out to somewhere, a better neighborhood or a better place. So that's kind of some flawed logic on the part of the people who use abstract liberalism. And the second way that he defines colorblind racism is through naturalization, which is a frame where people justify racial inequalities by saying they're natural. An example of this one would be with segregation. That some people would say that segregation was a product of people wanting to be surrounded by other people that are similar to them, which of course is definitely not true. Um, and lastly, he talks about the rhetorical strategies of colorblind racism, and I think everybody has kind of experienced this in one way or another. I know I have. Um, I feel like everybody knows that one person that likes to start things that they say with I'm not racist, or I love insert culture here, and then they say something that's pretty racist. Um, so I do have some experience with that one. Um, I think that's the most common form of colorblind racism that's alive today, um, because I do feel that it's kind of everywhere. It's in the workplace, in the school. Um, it's just kind of spreads around. And with that, those are my answers to the discussion board. Uh, can't wait to see your guys' answers and make some responses. So, thank you for watching my video.